I want to welcome everybody back from lunch and thank you for joining our concurrent workshop. This workshop is entitled Increasing Understanding of Genetics and Health Through Patient Data Sharing. It's going to be presented by Juliann Savatt. She's a certified genetic counselor at Geisinger in central Pennsylvania. For the past 6 years, she has held both research and clinical roles, including coordination of ClinGen patient data sharing efforts, care of patients in the Cancer Genetics Clinic and Autism and Developmental Medicine Institute, and facilitation of research exploring the outcomes of returning actionable genomic results to biobank participants. Her work empowers patients to learn about their genetic information and allows patients to be active stakeholders in transforming the genetics knowledge base and allows them to be participants in and drive genetic research. As genetic testing becomes more and more common, data is accumulating rapidly, and projects such as the one you'll hear about is helping the community to be more precise in interpreting the meaning of DNA changes across many different populations. Collectively, these data will enhance our genetic knowledge for both providers and patients. Juliann is going to allow about 10 minutes at the end for questions, and I will give her a verbal warning if so when we're nearing the end of the hour. And she will also be reachable by email for questions. So I will be quiet and allow Juliann to get started.
Thanks for that, Michelle. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully now you can see my slides in presenter mode. I see Michelle nodding, so that's great. So as Michelle mentioned, my name is Juliann Savatt, and I'm a genetic counselor at Geisinger. At Geisinger, I help to coordinate the NIH-funded Clinical Genome Resources patient data sharing efforts. And before I jump in today, I first want to thank the conference organizers for allowing me to speak about a topic that I'm passionate about. And I want to thank all of you who are attending this session today. I'm really delighted to speak to you about how we can increase our understanding of genetics and health through patient data sharing. I don't have any potential conflicts of interest to disclose. And Michelle outlined it nicely, but some of the things that I'm going to talk about today include first, how individual patients can participate in the data sharing process by joining patient registries and sharing their genetic and health data. I think a theme, at least from some of the sessions that I've been able to be in this morning, is that patients are really partners in our provision of genetic services and our understanding of genetics. And that's really a big piece of what I do and why we try to engage patients in data sharing. We'll explore the benefits of data sharing, including how patients can contribute novel genetic information, additional health information that can really help us better understand genes, variants, and their relationship to health. And then we'll also examine how data sharing can provide individuals who've had genetic testing with other opportunities for research, the ability to receive updates about their genetic test results, and the ability to connect with other patients and families. Before I dive into my slides, something that is really helpful to me, and I usually do this with a raise of hands, but given our Zoom world, I wanted to get a sense of who is attending and what roles you might have or hold. So hopefully the team has pasted a Mentimeter into the chat, and we'll see if this works. If you could just provide me a little bit about who you are. Are you a healthcare provider? Are you a patient and advocate, lab geneticist, lab staff? And I'll just give this a couple of moments. Okay, looks like responses have slowed down. And at the end of the day, I think that there's something here for everybody. And I think we're going to talk about how these different pieces of patient data sharing can apply to you no matter what group you find yourself in. But it's just helpful for me to know so I can tailor my discussion and some of the things that I talk about a little bit more. So thanks for this. It looks like we're about 50% healthcare provider and then sort of a smattering of other roles. So thanks for that. All right, let me put my slides back up. So first, I want to begin by walking through my experience with patient data sharing efforts and the work that I help to support at Geisinger. The Clinical Genome Resource, or ClinGen, is an NIH-funded project that's dedicated to building a resource that defines the relevance of genes and variants. So what genes are associated with disease, what genetic changes or variants cause disease, and ultimately, the ClinGen group wants to curate information and put it back out there in the public space to inform clinical care and ensure that patients are receiving clinical care that's based on the information that we have. The efforts within ClinGen to determine what genes and variants are associated with disease really rely on sharing of genomic and health information. And ClinGen encourages data sharing from a number of stakeholders, so patients, clinicians, labs, and researchers. And really my work within ClinGen focuses on patient data sharing, and that's what we're going to be talking most about today. Labs, researchers, and clinicians have been sharing genetic and health information for some time to increase our understanding, but the ClinGen project felt strongly that patients could also serve as an important source of additional information. I don't think I have to tell you all that patients are often experts about their own health history and can provide much more detail about their symptoms over time, their diagnoses, and just an overall picture of their health. ClinGen felt that access to this additional detailed information could really be helpful in increasing our understanding of genes and genetic variants. And as a result, in 2014, the ClinGen team launched a patient registry called Genome Connect to empower patients to share their de-identified genetic and health information with publicly available databases. The registry is online and it's open to anyone who's had genetic testing, regardless of results or diagnosis. So it's not gene or condition specific. The registry is currently available in English, and I'm very pleased to say we are almost finished with our translation into Spanish. So the registry will be available in Spanish in what I hope is a short time. Participants enroll online, they consent to de-identified data sharing and recontact. They provide their health history via patient surveys, and then they upload a copy of their genetic test results. As I mentioned, after consent, each participant provides their health history details via surveys. We start with an initial health survey that's really used to capture an overview of participants' health. The initial survey inquires about general issues across 17 broad body systems. So do you have issues with the GI system, with your cardiovascular system? For each issue that participants say they have, yes, I have a problem or a diagnosis in that area, they receive an additional page that tries to collect additional information. So for example, if they indicate that they have had issues with their heart or cardiovascular system, they then would get an additional page which would try to nail down what exactly are the differences that they have. Is it a cardiomyopathy or a heart defect? Also, over time, we assign additional surveys to collect just finer and finer health details. So if someone does say, yes, I have a heart issue, it's a cardiomyopathy, a couple weeks after the participant enrolls, they receive another survey that just asks more details. What type of cardiomyopathy? Do they have any non-genetic risk factors like a chemotherapy that they've received? Really, so we're trying to get a complete picture of participants' health as best we can. Although the surveys that we provide are in patient-friendly terms, we do have them structured on the back end. So everything that the patient sees are in terms that we hope is lay language. It's been piloted with patients to try and make it as friendly as possible, but we have it structured on the back end so that we can share data in a very structured manner. So for instance, as I'm showing here on the slide, if a participant indicates that they have growth differences, they're taken to a page with multiple different types of growth differences, all with sort of examples, definitions, and then they can provide exactly what's going on with them. If they select short stature here on the back end, that maps to a structured term for that data sharing.
Hi, Adam. Hi. Nice. Sorry,
Juliann,
Juliann.
sorry, I just muted you. So great, thank you.
After providing their health history via surveys, participants share their genetic test results. They just upload it simply to their profile account, and then our genetic counselors review the report to collect all information about variants that were reported. We know that patients have variable understanding of their variants, and we do this so that we can really make sure that we're collecting data in a standardized way and ensuring its accuracy for our data sharing efforts. If participants no longer have a copy of their genetic test report, our staff can obtain permission to request their records from the laboratory that completed their testing or their healthcare provider that ordered it. Once that genetic and health information are collected from patients in the registry, their de-identified information is shared with a couple of publicly available databases. The first is NCBI's ClinVar. ClinVar is a publicly available database of genetic changes in their classifications, and it's a database where many clinical laboratories, researchers, and healthcare providers submit genetic and health information, and it's a resource that they use when they identify a variant and want to see, has it been seen before? Is it out there in the public space? The submissions from Genome Connect include the genetic information as it appears on our participants' reports, and then their health details from participant surveys using those structured terms. These details are submitted in a manner so that it's clear that it's coming from a patient registry and that the lab might also submit here, but what we're really trying to do is provide additional health details above and beyond what labs, clinicians, and researchers often submit to the database. Additionally, a subset of participants share reports that identify what's called a candidate gene. A candidate gene is a gene that may be associated with a set of symptoms based on preliminary research of the gene's role in the body, but really more information is needed to say if that gene is associated with a particular condition. Candidate genes are submitted to a data network called Matchmaker Exchange to try to enable matching with other healthcare providers or labs that are exploring gene-disease relationships in hopes of moving them from being this candidate gene, a possibility, into a more definitive category of, yeah, it's associated with a genetic condition, or no, we don't think this is associated with a single phenotype or health condition. So why is patient data sharing important? And this is sort of the next section that I want to move into, and I'm going to share a little bit of our experience, but I would love to hear if any of you have any initial thoughts using the word cloud function in Mentimeter about what might be helpful, what could we learn from patients sharing their genetic and health data, and how could that inform our understanding and benefit the patients?
Let me just confirm that that's the correct link. Yes.
I'll just give it a second and see if we get any responses.
Yeah, and just a quick note, if you're having any trouble accessing the poll, just type it in the chat and I will go ahead and put your answers in the poll.
Awesome, thank you. I'm seeing some great ones come in already of better understanding, variant interpretation, power of numbers, phenotype research, resolve VUSs. And I think these really get at the reason why we launched this in the first place of more information. The more information we can get out there, hopefully the better we can understand. Better understanding, these are great. I'm gonna let it go one more second, but hopefully we'll dig into these all just a little bit more this afternoon and show you what our experience has been to date. Okay. So the three big benefits of data sharing that I wanna focus in on are really ones that I think you all touched on in some of that word cloud submissions. Informing our understanding of genes and variants, facilitating genetic updates, so that resolution of VUSs, and then supporting connections between stakeholders. And I hope to share some of our experiences over the past going on 7 years here. So first, informing our understanding of genes and variants. So I think many of you probably are aware of these pieces, but when a laboratory or a clinician identify a genetic variant through testing, the next step, of course, is to try to interpret that variant or determine its impact on how the gene works in the body and if it could be associated with a health condition, developmental differences, those sorts of things. So the first question is, one, is the gene associated with disease? Do we have enough information to say this gene is associated with seizures or autism? If we do have a relationship to a disease, the next question then is, okay, does that specific variant impact how the gene works in the body? Is it pathogenic? Are we able to put it into one of these definitive categories? And all of this relies on information that's available out there in the literature and the public space to answer these questions. So certainly, I think as many of you clued in on, individuals sharing data can really inform our understanding of these things. Currently, the genetic basis of between 6,000 and 13,000 genetic conditions remains to be identified. And even if we know that a gene is associated with a disease, many patients are receiving variants of uncertain significance or genetic changes that we're not sure if it's going to impact how the gene works in the body. So we have much to learn, and patients can be an important source of additional details to help with our understanding. So first, from our experience, we've seen that patients can provide access to unpublished cases to inform gene-disease relationships. Not every patient who's undergoing genetic testing is included in a case series or a publication. So if they are interested in data sharing, it might be a way to get the information out there to inform what are those links between those genes and health conditions. Also, it can offer more detailed information to inform variant classification and better understand, does this variant, seem to impact how that gene functions in the body? So first, we've seen that participants in data sharing are providing additional health details, additional information regarding inheritance of the variant above and beyond what's typically shared by laboratories and clinicians to the database. Just because the nature of data sharing with ClinVar, clinicians and labs are often unable to submit all of these details. Additionally, labs and clinicians are often unable to recontact patients if additional information would be helpful down the line. And registries can sometimes do that a little bit more readily, be able to ask, okay, since you've become an adult, have you started to have issues with X, Y, or Z to help increase our understanding? In addition to providing those additional details, additional health information regarding inheritance, patients enrolling in data sharing are also providing novel genetic changes that haven't been submitted to the database previously. From our submissions to date to ClinVar, 41% were not submitted by the reporting lab or another submitter. So patients taking the time to enroll in data sharing and to share their information is really getting it out there in the public space. And if the variant is seen again in another child or another adult, it can be really useful in informing our understanding at that time. So to provide sort of an example of how patients providing information can increase our understanding, I wanted to just sort of walk through one of our prior experiences. So I will call this participant Ella. Ella is a pediatric patient with a history of seizures beginning in infancy. She had exome sequencing ordered back in 2015, and a likely pathogenic variant in SCN8A, a gene that is associated with infantile seizures, was identified. Her parents were tested, and the variant was not found in either of them, suggesting that the variant was de novo, or new and unique to Ella. Because the genetic change had not been seen in healthy individuals, was found to be new and unique to her, and was expected to impact how the gene works in the body, the clinical lab, Lab 1, classified it as likely pathogenic. So Ella and her family had an answer for her seizures, and they chose to participate in the registry to get her information out there in the public space. We then submitted her de-identified genetic and health information to ClinVar. And at the time of our submission, there were 2 other records in the database. The first was from Lab 1, the laboratory that had reported the variant out to this family. So this is likely the record reflects Ella as well. But we noted that there were fewer details within their record. There was no information about Ella's seizures, no information about the fact that the variant was de novo or new and unique to her. So this really illustrates that patients providing their information just provides additional details that can be really helpful. The second laboratory who had submitted it, Lab 2, had interpreted the variant as uncertain, meaning that based on the information available to them at the time they had reported this out, they didn't feel like they had enough information to say that it clearly impacted how the gene works in the body. After our submission, Lab 2 reached out to our team and said, we noticed your submission, you had some additional details in there, including the fact that the variant was new and unique to this participant. Can you confirm that? This would be really helpful to us because we were unable to test parents. Our patients' parents weren't available, and knowing that might be helpful for our team as well. So we were able to go back to the report, confirm, yes, in fact, it was listed as de novo, and ultimately share that information back with Lab 2. This allowed them to go back, reinterpret the variant, reclassify it as likely pathogenic, and update their patient's report and share that back with their patient. So Ella, our Genome Connect participants' results and care weren't impacted by her family taking the time to share her results, but ultimately them taking the time to share their information enabled another family to get clear genetic test results and to move an uncertain variant into a more definitive category for that particular family. In addition to informing our understanding of genes and variants by just providing more information, patient-centered data sharing can also enable updates back to participants who've engaged in that data sharing. So as I just outlined in that case example, our understanding of variants can shift over time. We hope to reclassify uncertain variants as pathogenic or as benign as we get more information. And we know that sometimes variants that are interpreted as pathogenic or benign might shift as well, just because of our increasing understanding. One study of a cancer genetics laboratory found that over a 10-year period, just over 6% of variants that they had found were reclassified. And that translated to almost 60,000 updated reports, some of which can impact patients' medical management and care. Clinical labs and healthcare providers' duty to reassess genetic variants to recontact patients has been the subject of ongoing discussion, and there's no clear legal duty for laboratories or providers to recontact patients. But there is a consensus that recontacting patients is beneficial, and most patients seem to value being recontacted when there is updated information. Lab and healthcare providers' reassessment and recontacting practices of patients really vary. And there are barriers to recontacting patients, including limited resources. When patients move and their contact information changes, these can all make it more difficult to recontact. Under current circumstances, two large genetic societies, the American College of Medical Genetics and the European Society of Human Genetics, have suggested that patients share in the responsibility of recontact, and they should be engaged in this process as a means to address potential barriers and ensure that they're receiving up-to-date information. Also, ACMG has suggested that novel methods are going to be needed to ensure that patients are receiving updated information moving forward. Early on in Genome Connect's data sharing, we recognized that the registry might identify cases where our participants' report is out of date compared to the current knowledge base, and that the registry could provide a means for patients to engage in the recontacting process and just remain informed of their genetic test results. Through our data sharing with ClinVar, our team might identify that the patient's genetic test report is out of date compared to the clinical testing lab's current classification in the database. Through our submission to Matchmaker Exchange, we might learn that gene-disease relationships have been clarified and a candidate gene is now associated with disease. And this information may or may not have made its way back to our participants and their families. So recognizing that Genome Connect could identify updates, we started to explore if this might be something that we'd be able to share back with our participants. In September of 2016, so almost 5 years ago now, we sent a survey to current participants to attempt to capture their preferences about receiving updates from a patient registry. This wasn't something that we were aware of others doing, and we really wanted to get our stakeholders' opinions and perspectives on this. At that time, they were provided a brief summary about genetic test results and how results might be updated over time. And then we're asked up to 8 questions regarding whether they'd like to learn about these updates in general, and if they'd like to learn about them from Genome Connect, the registry that they'd engaged in. Of those that completed the survey, 99% indicated that they would want to receive updates in general, and that they would want to receive them from Genome Connect if we became aware of potential updates. In fact, 98% of participants saw potentially receiving updates regarding their or their child's results as a potential benefit of participation. In thinking of providing this information back, we realized that some of the updates might impact medical management while others may not. For example, a change from a variant of uncertain significance to pathogenic is likely to impact diagnosis or care, whereas a change from likely benign to benign is not going to shift much of anything. Consequently, we asked participants what type of updates they'd want to receive, and the vast majority, 92%, said any and all updates. In addition to obtaining information on preferences about the type of updates that would be provided, we inquired if receiving updates should be something that participants have the option to decline. And the majority, 82% of our participants, indicated that there should be the option to decline receiving such information. So participants said, while I want to know, I recognize that maybe other participants might not be as interested in this type of information, and so there should be a choice when enrolling if you want to receive updates from the registry or not. Following this survey, Genome Connect then created a process to provide participants the option to receive updates to their variant classifications and those gene-disease relationships. In February of 2017, we established this process, and Upon enrollment, individuals are now required to provide their preference regarding receipt of updates from the registry. Participants that enrolled prior to this time have been prompted to update their preferences via email and reminders in our quarterly newsletters. To date, 98% of responding participants have opted to receive updates from the Genome Connect team. If an update is identified, the process from there is first that our team reaches out to the reporting laboratory. We have the ability to connect with reporting laboratories in our consent. And really the purpose of this is to ensure that there is truly an update, that the information that's in ClinVar or that we've identified through Matchmaker Exchange reflects what the reporting laboratory currently thinks about that gene or variant. From there, for the participants who've opted to receive updates, we then email them, informing them that there might be an update to their results and direct them back to their healthcare provider or a genetics provider in their area to get more information about the specific update and its potential impact on their care or next steps for them and their family. We then also encourage participants that if they do receive an updated genetic test report, that they certainly share it back with our team so that we can close the loop and update our data sharing to ensure that what we've shared with ClinVar also reflects the current understanding and what that family has been provided with. So this brings me to my second case example, just to sort of highlight our experience here. So I'll call this participant Paula. Paula is an adult with a history of seizures and an intellectual disability. Her mother had legal guardianship of her and chose her to enroll her in Genome Connect after she had had several genetic tests. None of her genetic testing had been diagnostic or provided an answer for her clinical history, but exome sequencing did identify a candidate gene, or again, a gene that we're not quite sure if it's associated with disease just yet, but given current information, could potentially be an explanation. So this candidate gene was CSNK2B, and after the family enrolled, we submitted this gene to Matchmaker Exchange in hopes of connecting with other researchers or clinicians who are trying to define, is this gene associated with a health condition? In December of 2019, our team became aware of a relationship between CSNK2B and mild to profound intellectual disabilities, developmental delays, and various types of seizures. So we had seen that in the literature, there's now a clear disease association. We contacted the reporting lab first, who shared that they had upgraded the CSNK2B gene to disease associated, given this novel information, and had recently reported the same variant out in another patient as pathogenic. So they had seen the same variant that was found in our participant and someone else. But these updates hadn't been shared back with our participant's family to date, however. Just given the laboratory's practices around recontacting, it wasn't something that had been shared back. So the Genome Connect team, because this family had opted to receive updates, contacted them to inform them there might be an update. The family then received an updated report from the laboratory documenting that the variant was indeed pathogenic, and the family's diagnostic odyssey came to a close at that point. They were able to obtain their answers. Another example where Genome Connect facilitated updates is case 3, who I'll call David. So David is a pediatric patient with a history of a prenatal cystic hygroma, or a fluid-filled cyst on the back of the neck. He now is a pediatric patient with behavioral issues, fine motor delay, and dysmorphic features reported by his parents. He underwent exome sequencing in 2015, and at that time was found to have 2 genetic changes in the DHCR7 gene. One change was found on each copy of the gene, and one was interpreted as pathogenic and the other as uncertain. This particular gene is associated with an autosomal recessive condition called Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome. And Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome, for those of you who aren't familiar, is characterized by distinctive facial features, small head size, intellectual disability or learning problems, and potentially behavioral problems as well. Because one of the changes was uncertain, we certainly don't have an answer for this participant at the time when they enrolled. We submitted these variants to ClinVar and learned that the uncertain variant had been reclassified to likely benign by the reporting laboratory. We recontacted the family, which prompted them to speak with their healthcare provider, who then ordered additional genetic testing, or an exome reanalysis. And that reanalysis did a couple of things. First, it documented the reclassification of the variant. So said, yep, what the registry had shared back with you, that's reflected in this updated report. But it also identified a novel de novo variant of uncertain significance in another gene associated with dysmorphic features, neurodevelopmental disorders, and congenital anomalies. So Recontact can provide answers, like in the first case that we talked through, Paula's case with that candidate gene. But even in cases like this, where the updated provided back doesn't provide the family with an explanation, it still can be important. In this case, Recontact prompted additional assessments, identified another variant of interest for this family, and updates like this might not be prioritized by laboratories or clinicians, given some of the current barriers to Recontact that exist. So the registry sort of engaging in this process and providing patients another avenue to receive updates has just ensured that the family was provided the updated information, was able to move forward from there. In total, our team has provided 43 updates back to participants to date that are just outlined on this slide, and it kind of shows you the shift from what was the original classification to the updated classification. I'll highlight that 15 of them were likely to impact diagnosis or care, like in the first case example that we talked through, but certainly in some of these other cases, it still impacted care, prompted additional reassessments, enabled families to get back with their healthcare provider or genetics provider. So patient data sharing, in addition to informing our understanding, it also can enable individuals and families to remain informed about their own genetic test results and keep abreast of updated information that could impact them. So finally, I want to walk through how patient data sharing can support connections between stakeholders. The Genome Connect enables connections with a couple of different stakeholders. So participants who enroll in the registry first can connect with other researchers or clinicians who might have interest in a particular gene or variant. Because we're able to recontact participants over time, if a researcher reaches out to us and says, I'm collecting patients with variants in this gene. Do you have anyone? We're able to go back to our participants and explain, here's an additional research study that might be of interest to you. If you're interested, here's the next steps. Additionally, through the registry, we've set up what we call our participant matching feature to enable participants to match with one another based on gene, disease, or just geographic location. Many genetic conditions are rare, and patients might have had the experience of being told that they're the first patient that their clinician has seen with that diagnosis or with a variant in that gene. The registry can enable them to connect with others to enable the exchange of informational and emotional support. And like most things within the registry, this piece is optional. So participants have the ability to select their preferences regarding whether they participate in this piece of things too. To highlight how Genome Connect can connect patients with other stakeholders, I'll share one last case example. So in March of 2016, a patient underwent exome sequencing due to a history of autism, intellectual disability, Tourette syndrome, and hypotonia. No diagnosis was identified, but 2 candidate genes were found. In 2019, the family enrolled in the registry, and the candidate genes that were reported on this patient's report were submitted to Matchmaker Exchange, again, to try to enable that matching. In June of last year, a researcher in Europe was collecting patients with variants in GRIA1, one of the candidate genes that was reported to this family, and was interested in connecting with families to just learn more about their health history, ask some additional questions, engage them in further research. We were able to recontact the family to let them know about this case series, and with their permission, connect them with this researcher for inclusion in that publication, and hopefully to continue to move our understanding of this particular gene forward. So given our experience with patient data sharing, we recognize really the value of engaging patients in this process. They're providing additional information. We're able to recontact them with updates. They can connect with other stakeholders. But we quickly realized and were reminded that this is just one patient registry. There are many other patient registries out there that are collecting valuable information, but it might not be shared publicly. So as a result, what we've tried to do since 2018 is to work with other registries, engaging patients with genetic testing or diagnoses to help them share that information in a public way so that they can benefit back from data sharing in the same ways that we've seen from our participants on Genome Connect. So Genome Connect does a couple of things. We first work with registries that are built on the same platform as Genome Connect. We use the Invitae registry platform. And for those who are on the same platform, we really can copy over the infrastructure that we've created for Genome Connect to enable data sharing. We're also working with registries on other platforms. We recognize that the process for data sharing in those cases is just going to be a case-by-case basis depending on the existing infrastructure and consent. But at the end of the day, we want to work to enable de-identified data sharing with ClinVar and other databases from registries that are interested in engaging in this process. To date, we've worked with 10 registry partners to share data, and these registries include gene and condition-specific registries, as well as registries that engage just patients who've had genetic testing in general. And I can say that the benefits that we saw from Genome Connect, we're seeing with these registries as well. We're providing additional information that's been really useful in some cases and in informing variant classification, but we've also seen some of those other benefits of the ability to recontact patients over time with variant interpretation updates, the ability to give them information about other research, and that ability to connect to. So altogether, Genome Connect and the partnerships with these external registries have engaged over 5,000 patients in data sharing to date and resulted in the submission of over 2,600 variants to that ClinVar database and nearly 100 genes to Matchmaker Exchange. So we continue to see the power of data sharing, and we hope that these numbers will continue to increase over time because really the strength in numbers that someone put in that word cloud is what we're trying to aim for here. So how can you get involved? And if you're sitting there sort of thinking, okay, this is great, but what next? What can I do? I kind of want to move to that space and walk through a few of those things. So first, work with us to expand data sharing. So that can be in a couple of different ways. If you have had genetic testing or are a family member of someone who's had genetic testing, you can engage in data sharing. If that's something you're interested in, engage with a registry that's sharing data actively with ClinVar. And I showed them briefly on the slide there, but we can answer more questions about those too. If you care for or interact with patients who are undergoing genetic testing, inform them of opportunities to share data through Genome Connect or again, one of these other registries. And we have materials to help with that. If you work with a patient registry, discuss the opportunity to engage in what we call our patient data sharing program, or how ClinGen is working with other registries to share data. So depending on where you fall, there are many ways that you can support data sharing moving forward. In addition to increasing data sharing, use the individual data that patients are sharing to inform understanding of the relationship between genes, variants, and health. The variant information from ClinVar is periodically submitted to the variant information from Genome Connect is periodically shared with ClinVar, and we have information regarding the variant and phenotype in the submission, but we always welcome additional questions if you have them. So I'm going to briefly walk through just an example, and then I think we can open it up from questions from there. So within the ClinVar record, if you've searched a variant and scroll down and see a submission from Genome Connect, you can see some details there within the submission. You can see things like inheritance. So for this particular patient, it was inherited from dad. You can see how the reporting laboratory classified that variant. So this was interpreted as likely pathogenic by a laboratory back in 2018. If you want to see additional details about the health history, you can certainly do that by just toggling a little bit with the ClinVar view. And you can see all of the health details that this participant has provided here in this list. As I mentioned, we always welcome questions. So if you see a ClinVar record and say, well, I wonder at what age this patient started to have seizures, that would be really helpful for me to know in my particular case. We welcome those at the email on the screen here. Also, if your favorite gene or variant, you just don't happen to see that in ClinVar or don't see a Matchmaker Exchange submission from us, we also welcome questions. Again, because submissions are done on a periodic basis, we might have someone that we're preparing a submission for that we could let you know about. So we welcome people to reach out to us. And then you can see all of the registries engaged in data sharing under the ClinVar submitter. So I've just put the URL here. And any registry that where we're facilitating the ClinVar submission is listed with the Genome Connect name. So if it's Simon Searchlight, for instance, it'll say Simon Searchlight Genome Connect, so you can look for registries engaged in data sharing via this list. So in summary, I hope today that I've done an okay job articulating that Genome Connect and patient registries offer a structured way for patients to share their genetic and health information. Registries are an important source of additional details about participants' health that can be useful in informing our understanding, and also novel genetic information that's just not been put out there in the public space. Ultimately, these additional details can really help inform our understanding of genes and variants moving forward. But not only that, registries can serve as a liaison to help ensure that patients are receiving up-to-date information about their genetic test results, including up-to-date information about variant classifications, about gene-disease relationships. Registries also can enable connections with other stakeholders, including other research studies, the ability to connect with other families. And we're actively trying to expand patient data sharing efforts to offer more patients the ability to share their data if that's something that they're interested in. So remember that you can support these efforts by trying to engage an increasing number of patients in data sharing, but also using the information that's been shared to inform your own work, care of your patients. So with that, I want to acknowledge all of the people who make this work possible, including the team that supports Genome Connect at Geisinger and at the Broad. I also want to acknowledge our participants and the patients who've engaged in data sharing, and how them putting their information out there is what makes our work possible. So you can find additional information at the link that is on the slide here. Any questions that we're not able to address today, we also welcome via email. So I've put our general Genome Connect email there. And I think with that, we can open it up for questions.
Thank you very much. That was a great overview of the Genome Connect project, and also its contribution to ClinVar, which in the field of newborn screening, we find a lot of variants of uncertain significance. We always go to ClinVar, and so we welcome updating and kind of clarifying, because more often than not, you see that example where you have conflicting interpretations. So that was a great overview, and I think there's some questions.
There are. So I will try to do my best, and I have not monitored the chat through the whole time, so these will probably not be in a great order, but I see one on here that's asking about if it's only used for patients with VUSs, or if patients with any genetic results can submit to share. And we welcome all comers. So it's VUSs, pathogenic, likely pathogenic, benign, whatever classification is on your report, you are welcome to share your information with us. The first case that I shared was a family that shared a likely pathogenic classification, and ultimately that impacted another family probably halfway across the country get clear genetic test results. So it's valuable no matter the classification that's listed. So thank you, Jacqueline, for that question. Great one to clarify. Another one that I see here, was there any information, any feedback as to why the 2% would not want to receive updates from the the registry? So that's a great question, Jen. And in our initial survey back in 2016, we did ask those questions of, well, why wouldn't you want to if you don't? And at least from that survey, those participants told us that they were just really unsure about if they wanted updates in general. They weren't sure that they wanted information moving forward. They kind of wanted their answer or their results at the time they received them, and didn't want to engage with the results following that. And others said that they'd really just prefer them from their healthcare provider and didn't want it from another space. So recognizing that the vast majority of people want updates, we wanted to give that space for the minority who might not be interested in receiving updates at all, or from a registry, to let us know that when they enroll with us. So thank you for that question. Another one that I see here are, how are patients currently learning about Genome Connect, from Jacqueline. So that's a great question as well. We've seen that the vast majority of participants come to us either from learning about the registry from their healthcare provider, so their healthcare provider informing them about the registry, or information on their genetic test report. So we have worked with some large genetic testing laboratories to have wording placed on the report about Genome Connect as an opportunity for families, and about a quarter come to us from that way, quarter from providers who've informed them of things. See another one here about any concerns with patients adding their own HPO terms, like if they're the most accurate descriptors of their phenotype. This is a question that has come up before, and I think that my sense is that anecdotally, patients do a reasonably good job of providing their health history. I think these surveys are not as good as the gold standard of an electronic health record. But we do hope to validate our surveys against electronic health records in the future. So a future to do item is to work with patients to compare the answers that they provide to their responses to our surveys, to really put some numbers around how well are we doing with these. Are there any particular disease areas that are of more concern and maybe are less reliable compared to others? But I think in general, our sense is they do a pretty good job, and the information that we're sharing is really a starting place that if we want to recontact for more information, or if it would be helpful to get healthcare records down the line, we certainly can do those things. All right, I'm going to scroll here and see what other ones that I've missed.
Might be the ones in the chat. I had a question while you're looking. So how many people are actually behind Genome Connect? Like how many, is it just you, or do you have an army behind you?
We are a small but mighty army, I would say. So ClinGen is a very large project itself. It spans many institutions and has hundreds of people who are working at various parts of ClinGen. And Genome Connect is really just a really small slice of the ClinGen pie. Our team is a few genetic counselors, a few genetic counseling assistants, a laboratory geneticist, and that about rounds it out. So it's a small number of us who really are passionate about this and try to support this effort with our time. And as I mentioned, we don't have to do all the technical things. We use a registry platform that's from a different provider. So they have sort of the technical team that helps deal with some of those things for us.
Good. Yeah, I know ClinGen has a lot of the expert panels and the expert curators. So over time, the information, at least on specific disorders or specific classes of disorders, presumably is getting better and more interpretable. I work on one on Pompe, and I think we're going to move to some of the other LSDs potentially. But it's kind of interesting to see how they've put together, the groups that they've put together are kind of small, but there's experts in either the lab, the clinical, and then of course the support people from ClinGen. So I think, you know, slowly we're moving towards understanding a lot of these variants.
Yeah, and thank you for your work on the expert panels. And I think that we're actively trying to make sure that the information shared by patients is also being used by those expert panels, so that if we have an expert panel trying to curate variants related to LSDs, can we make sure that any information we have from patients can help inform that? And yeah, so thanks for that.
Yeah, that's good. I think there's another question from Jacqueline.
Jacqueline, I will say you have fabulous questions, so thank you for these. Is there another consent process that occurs when a child becomes an adult where previously the parent was allowing the participation and now the adult child who can make their own medical decisions needs to provide permission? Yes. So our Genome Connect is governed by the Geisinger IRB. So we sort of the typical process of reconsent at 18 is something that we embark upon. And we acknowledge that some of our participants will be able to consent from themselves when they turn 18. Others, parents will obtain legal guardianship and will continue to be the decision maker. So when someone reaches 18, we recontact them and prompt them to reconsent, or try to engage with the parent to ensure that we have appropriate documentation on file that they are the guardian and continue to be the decision maker. And Jacqueline, I'd love to connect with you more about this as well. So feel free to send me an email at that info@genomeconnect.org email. That gets to me and one of our other genetic counselors. And if you have other questions, happy to connect.
I had a question on just how you feel about this concept of sort of the patient's responsibility to go back and get their exome results reanalyzed, or, like to, in the midst of someone who's dealing with maybe a child with special health care needs, and kind of remembering to maybe ask that question, and potentially not even having the capability to do that.
I think it's really difficult. I understand the ACMG and ESHG's position of we can't put it on everybody, so let's all try to be responsible for making sure that we're remaining informed about things. But when you have a child with unique healthcare needs, or if you yourself are undergoing cancer treatment, it can be just one thing that's far down the list for you to do, to recontact your provider to see if there are updates. So I am a proponent of anything that we can do to streamline this process, make this process easier for everyone involved. So whether that's the patient through a patient registry, having us be sort of a liaison and helping with those updates, or if it's trying to figure out new processes within laboratories, or thinking about reimbursement for clinicians to make sure that they're going back to reassess variants or recontact patients when there are updates. I think we need to do as much as we can to streamline the process and decrease the burden where we can.
Thanks. I think there's another question popped up for you.
Yes, so from Shelley, is it possible to share common data elements from a private registry on Invitae with Genome Connect, but still maintain the private registry? So yes, so when we engage with other registries, Genome Connect isn't taking them over, and we're not taking all of their information. What we're really trying to do is use the information that and knowledge that we've gained over the past years around data sharing, and help other registries do the same thing. So it's not sort of migrating data to us or taking over what registry you already have, but working with you to see, this is what you're collecting, how can that information be shared, and what else might be needed so that we can share data? Do you have consent? Well, if not, we have a consent form that we've developed for other registries. Can we use that for you? Are you collecting genetic information from your participants? No? Well, can our genetic counseling team help review reports to collect that genetic information? But it still remains your registry under your umbrella, but we try to just help with the data sharing piece. So great question.
Good, thank you. All right, does anyone else have any other questions? Going once. All right, well, thank you so much for that presentation. It was very, very good. And here's the contact information if something comes up afterwards.